All right. What's up, Print Hustlers? How's it going? My name is Nick. I am on the Printavo sales team, and we are super excited for today's episode of Printavo University. We're talking about printing with Plastisol. We'll give everybody a second to file in here, but as we do that, we'd love to see where everybody's watching from. So in the chat, let us know. You can type in where you're watching from. I'm calling from Los Angeles. And then I'm going to introduce our host for today. We're going to hear from Matt Marcotte over in Chicago. He is on our customer success team. How's it going, Matt?
It's going great. Thanks for the awesome intro as always, Nick. I'm always kind of nerding out at the beginning of these things, talking about how excited I am. I am really, really stoked for today's, though. It's an honor and a pleasure to be able to bring in people that I've always respected and looked up to in the industry. Today's guest is obviously no different than that. Probably one of the ones I've nerded out with the most over my shorter than his career in the industry. But yeah, I'm super stoked to have Lon Winters of Graphic Elephants. Before I hand over to him, I've been picking his brain easily 6-7 years now because I was running supplies and stuff for 6 years. So whenever I would see him trade shows there and pick his brain about anything, I think like 2-3 years ago, he made the mistake of letting me get his phone number. So there was some random, like, hey, Lon, a question for you. He's like, who the heck is this? No, he's always been super helpful, super gracious. I mean, not only that, but like getting to see all the things he does, the extracurricular things he does for the industry, with SGIA, all that stuff, and seeing him work with lots of different people. Heck of a great human all around, and phenomenal mind for the industry that we're lucky to have as a guest. So without any further ado, I want to introduce our guest, Lon Winters of Graphic Elephants. So Lon, sorry about my nerding out about you, but like I said, you're here. Can you give the folks that maybe don't know as much about you as I do a little background on like who you are, what you've done, what you've worked on, and what you're doing now?
All right. First, I'll say, no, don't stop. Don't stop. Don't. I appreciate that, Matt. It's awful nice of you. I'll do a shout out to Matt. He maybe is the last 10 years or so trying to do some of those things alongside. We both got to do Skills USA, the national championship screen printing as a judge, and got to know him pretty well while we hung out there. We weren't drinking during the event. This is kids, perhaps a couple after, on a day or two. I've been doing a little longer than Matthew, about a little over 30 years. I always tease that it's maybe too late to be a doctor. So this is all I know how to do. So I better get pretty good at it. So. And we've only gotten pretty good at it because we've made a lot of mistakes. We stumble and fall. I write a monthly column for Graphics Pro. It used to be Printware, and have for probably over 20 years. And every article is basically a story about something we screwed up, something we tripped over and made a mistake, and how we fixed it. Whether it was something technically to do with the ink or the screen making or the art, or even how we handle the customer and those kinds of things. And we make a lot of fun of ourselves. We've screwed a lot of stuff up, but we kind of learn from it and get better at it. My company, Graphic Elephants, has probably some of the best. In fact, I know some of the best people in the industry, and it's all about people. Even through this crazy crisis, we've been able to hold on to our very best. I call them my executive staff. I'll give him a shout out. Jason's been my right man for 25 years, 28 years. Ken's been with me since OP when I first got my start back in the late 80s. Corey's a great illustrator. We've been doing projects together for 25 years. Great channel separator. And my wife of 31 plus years, who's been really holds the whole thing together. So those are our key people that absolutely run the bus and are as talented as anybody I've ever seen or been around. So just a shout out.
Yeah, that's huge. And what you just said too about having like key people that you have to like kind of keep in your orbit to kind of help your success. I think that's massive. It's all about who you have around you to help get you to the next level. So
For sure.
I think more people need to do that. People that are always kind of singular minded and think they can take on the world alone. It's a longer journey and a lonelier journey. So it's always better to have those good people around you to do that. So awesome. Yeah. Thanks for doing a shout out to them. Appreciate that.
I have a real general question to start us out. So viewers who saw the last one, they saw how to start water-based printing. But I imagine a lot of our viewers, they're already doing Plastisol printing. They don't need to start, they're doing it already. So my question is, how do you get better at Plastisol printing? What are some of the ways you can improve your prints and get nicer looking garments?
First of all, I said this when we were talking the other day, we sling plenty of water here as well. In fact, when I mentioned OP, we started in water when it was a whole lot harder to work with. And then Plastisol kind of ruled the world for up till maybe about 10 years ago, when it started water-based started gaining some momentum again, especially with the brand's directive recently. I say recently, but it's been quite a while with the non-PVC direction. And I had a good friend of mine, Mark Gervais, say years ago, who runs the biggest factory in the world in China, when we used to talk about all these PVC substitute products that were coming out by the Plastisol companies, and he says, expletive water, duh. They've been doing it in Asia forever and never really stopped with Plastisol. So ultimately, Plastisol became that much easier to handle. But I'd say this, all rules apply. Plastisol, water-based, silicone, whatever chemistry, it comes down to making great screens. And if you can make great screens, you have a whole lot of control over the rest of the process. And one of the phrases I coined is that if you control the screen, then and only then do you have a chance to control the process. And if that's true, and I know it is, then the opposite is absolutely true. If you don't control the screen, you got no chance to control the process. So while water has some inherent issues that expose your screen making that you can get away with in Plastisol, Plastisol's forgiving when it comes to screen making. So if you have an inferior exposure unit, you're using an inferior emulsion, perhaps, inferior stencil, even inferior hardening, all those things will be exposed when you go to water, especially high solids water-based. Mm-hmm. But you can get away with an underexposed screen or a less than ideal screen while printing Plastisol, because the ink itself is so forgiving. Now, your prints will get better if you make better screens. So the knock on Plastisol can be, and a poor printer will give you they talk about the heavy-handed, almost transfer feeling, can't breathe, sweat puddle that you get on your chest from a big, thick Plastisol print. It doesn't have to be that way. If you use some of the methods that water has kind of taught us on the screen making piece of it, you can get a nice, smooth, soft drape with Plastisol equal to a lot of water-based types of applications. So it's all in process. It really comes down to process. But Plastisol is easier to handle if you're not making great screens. Let's put it that way.
So what you're saying, and I completely agree. There's a bit of a misnomer, right? That you can't have as soft of a print as you can get with water-based with Plastisol. Now, that's true in discharge, right? We're never going to be able to have a Plastisol print be as soft as discharge, because discharge, we're taking away the garment color and kind of dyeing it back. But when it comes to most water-based that we're looking out there, especially the high solid acrylics, we can get a similar hand feel and almost a one-to-one comparable product with those Plastisols. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, absolutely. With some of the additives, you're like a curable reducer or a chino base or a fashion soft base. And we'll get, people that are maybe a little less experienced will come into a trade show booth and insist that some of our Plastisol prints are water-based, or they are even discharged. You say, you can't get a bright red or a bright white to feel as soft as a discharge print with Plastisol. But if it's a maroon or a deep dark blue, we can get those colors without necessarily an underbase, and you can use your curable reducers to really give it a slick, soft feel. So all rules apply. So if you want a smooth, soft, good drape with a Plastisol, you would handle it like you would HSA. You're going to stack rather than trying to get a big thick ink deposit with a 110 mesh. I'm going to do some smoothing techniques where I use a stampinator or a heated roller or a heated iron, and I smooth before my print and then I smooth after my flash, so I can really dial in a nice smooth surface to stack on. And if you get those parts of it right, I can put my colors on real high meshes, even 230s, 305s, even as high as 380s, and I'm going to get that bright red. But if I stacked, instead of say a 110, maybe I'm running a 230 white and then stack another 195 on top of that, wet on wet, where my bright white areas are on both screens and my softer areas or my transition areas or my darker tones, royal, mid-tones, forest, or Kelly green, that type of thing, are on this we call the soft white. So I'm basically kind of using water-based methods to create my whites. So I get almost a grayscale type of underbase, and then I can stack my colors on top of that, generally wet on wet. So I can run a 8 or 10 color Plastisol print that's got a real smooth, soft hand with real bright colors, very comparable to an HSA multicolor print as well.
Yeah, which is huge. So, I mean, that's where love Night Owls, love Eric, all those folks. I know you know them very well too. They're doing some stuff that's out of this world. But for most shops, it's not really realistic to say we're just going to go 100% water based. And if you try that without having the minds that Val and Eric have, and that the want to be able to put in the hours to figure it all out, you're going to really be up against a wall. So that's where we thought this would be a great juxtaposition of another print university right after to jump in and say, hey, we can make the most out of our Plastisol still. So like you just said, like it all comes down to that screen. If you're not able to get really good Plastisol prints, you're not going to be able to get really good water-based prints. You're going to actually struggle more with those water-based prints because the nuance of dealing with water, right, is an uphill battle in itself. So exactly, it's one of those things where to make the most out of your Plastisol, really got to go backwards and work on that. And I'm sure you've seen this often with your many more years of consulting than I've done. But no matter what the ask really ever is, I always go, okay, let's look at the screen, right? It always comes back down to that screen. Sure. What is your control in your screen department? What are you doing with your screen? Garbage in, garbage out. So that's an annoying
Absolutely.
thing to do nonstop. But that
Absolutely.
screen is key, right?
Well, and you know, again, going back to the mistakes we've made, when we kind of started moving back into offering water, we were exposed. It showed the weaknesses that we had, that maybe we thought we were making better screens than we were. You know, ultimately, you know, and it only takes one. You can set up a 6-color HSA job and only one screen fails. But if one screen fails, you're stuck and you're going back to the drawing board and starting over. And so ultimately it pushed us to make better screens, which pushed us to make better Plastisol prints as well as water prints. So you have to break it down to the foundation, and our whole business is based on the screen. And I learned that from mentors. I didn't make that up. That's guys like Coudray and Joe Clark, rest his soul, and those guys beat it into my young and stupid brain back in the day when you don't think that things are as important as they are. And it's been my drum that I've been beating for the last 20 years probably, it's all about screens. And if we do anything as well or better than anybody in the world, it's make screens now. And ultimately, the very best printers in the world have one thing in common, because my good friend Michelle Moxley says we're all raised by wolves, our industry, us, except for we all come from different packs. So our methods are all different, but we can arrive at a great final product at speed or at high production rates. And the one thing that all of us have in common, the very best printers I think in the world, are that we make great screens. It's not how we do our art necessarily. People do great art. I don't mean that. Just like you said, it's garbage in, garbage out. And the steps are absolutely important, but the screen's the tipping point. And the one thing that we all do really well is make great screens. We pay attention to all the details from the tension to the mesh geometry to the stencil thickness to the off contact distance, the squeegee pressure. All those things affect all kinds of printing chemistry. And if we can perfect the screen making piece of it for Plastisol printing, your Plastisol prints will be that much better. If you make a better screen, Plastisol prints will be very good.
Now, question for you. When we're thinking about, and I hear a lot of the talking points, right? And a lot of times they're coming from somebody who sells ink. I wouldn't know, I never did that, right? But you always hear like, oh, well, the industry shifting, it's going to water. So you need to really jump on that bus now. Now, although we're seeing that there are segments of the industry that absolutely are diving into the water pool, pun intended, right? That it's not really that much of a market share as we might think. Do you have any insights on what that market share really looks like when it comes to how many people are really using Plastisol versus water-based out there?
You know, it's interesting. We have a great relationship with several of the HSA manufacturers or just water-based manufacturers. Some of the finest people in the industry. I believe that about several of them. And if there's a trend, it is probably moving towards water. But we do more water today than we've ever done, and every day we get a few more requests for it. But we work for some dealers on a retainer type of approach. We do printing in their booths and at trade shows, and we work with our customers and a lot of different things that we do with some of the dealers. And when we do that, first questions are, okay, what are we printing? Okay, how big's the equipment? What's, it's a 6 color, it's an 8 color, it's a 10 color. What's the theme? We'll design for that. And do you want to run water, or do you want to run Plastisol, or you want to run silicone? We've run silicone at shows before too. And their answer is typically, I don't know, I don't care, what do you want to run? And I said, what I want to run is whatever you're going to pay for, but here's what I'm going to need if I run water at a show. I'm going to need this many screens, I'm going to need this much help in cleanup, I'm going to need. So while it's not necessarily like the craziest thing you've ever done, at a trade show it's a lot harder because there's a lot more cleanup. And in the same breath, that dealer might say, we sell water-based, but it's less than 10% of our total ink consumption. So we're not talking about a West Coast dealer or even an East Coast dealer. These are southwestern, middle of the country dealers who sell a good amount of water-based, but they do an awful lot of Plastisol. And I can go back to when the major brands, actually, I think almost all the brands pulled most of the phthalates out of Plastisol as that legislation forced us to kind of move in a different direction to go non-phthalate. I have to say that right. It's not phthalate free, it's non-phthalate. When they pulled that out and the new direction was to go to a new chemistry, and this has been at least 10 years ago, probably.
Yeah, CPSI.
15.
10 years ago, I think, yeah.
Yeah, they were still selling a lot of classic Plastisols because through the legislation, it took a certain amount of time for ultimately at this date, we have to be moved on to the new chemistry. But a lot of clients continue to use the classic chemistry for several years until it became law as the transition came. So I think there's a big section of printers that maybe aren't paying attention enough to care, or don't care whether they, if the customer is not requesting it, that's what we do. We deliver what the customer expectations are, and if the customer wants water, then that's what we deliver them. I'm saying as an industry, as a community. But if they want soft, that's my call. Or they want smooth, or they want drape, or they want, just like 4-color process, simulated process, index, blah, blah, that's my problem, not yours. You want full color. I'll figure out how to get it full color. So I think in a lot of ways, there's a lot of lower profile companies that are like, I'm going to sit here and do this until somebody tells me I can't. So while the brands have driven it to get out of PVCs, there's not legislation that's driving it. I don't have really any skin in the game because we work for Plastisol companies and we work for water-based companies. It doesn't really matter, but I do think that a lot of people are in the, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Why would I want to deal with that? Especially, I've always said this on getting into HSA, it's not that it's harder, it's just different. Mm-hmm. And if you don't know what some of those things are, like Eric and Val were mentioning, you're going to fail. And you're going to fail at anything that you step outside your comfort zone in. And Plastisol is kind of God's gift of ink to mankind. And if it ain't broke and they're not paying attention and my customers aren't asking for it, why should I? Now, I caution that you should, because you can create new market and new revenue streams that you didn't really know existed. So you kind of want to dip your toe in different things. And Plastisol provides that as well. You can start working on special effects and textures and things like that. There's plenty that you can do with Plastisol as well.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about special effects. What's like a good process to start getting going? Do you pick the one that your customer asks you for? Do you pick one that you think looks cool? Like, how do you know what to start learning, and where do you start when you're learning it? We kind of built a bit of a reputation on it. We got I don't know if it's an honor or the burden of, we were a contract printer for Nike many years ago. And that was kind of the advent of the specialty applications with high density and textures per se. And Nike drove that. And we were helping a group build a big factory in Mexico. And in the short term, we did a bunch of the contract printing. Probably the longest 2 years of my life. Working for those guys is sometimes difficult. I have really good friends that have for many, many years, and they've kind of figured out how to wrap their arms around it, I guess. But it did drive us to learn an awful lot about specialty applications, textures, and different techniques. So that was another thing that really helped us wrap our arms around the screen making piece of it, because if you think about it, a thinner stencil gives you a thinner ink deposit, a thicker stencil gives you a thicker ink deposit, more wide open area, lets the ink pass all the mesh geometry, all those things that we began to learn so that we could figure out how to keep an edge, how to melt the edge, how to get a perfect anthracite color on top of a high density. So there's a bazillion effects, and we sort of let, I guess, our customer, or we let the industry come up with names that don't necessarily apply. They just names that stick, like things like simulated process. Like, isn't 4-color process simulated process? Okay. Or high density, what does that really mean? How about just a layered or a texture? I don't know. Anyway, they become common phrases, but ultimately the specialty or the special effect comes from in your head. You visualize something that you can create some type of texture. And one of the I guess I can call it a Lonism. If you can make something look like something it ain't,
it always works. And the high-end stuff is like applique. If you can make a screen print look like applique, and there's some work in that. And if it is convincing, it's really cool. And that's probably an advanced technique. But if you can print like a high-density clear over the top of ice bubbles or bubbles on the side of a beer glass, you get those little domes, and a whole lot easier to handle. We buy HD clear by the drum, and we overprint all kinds of wet things and ice and bubbles and that. And you can design into that. They're small shapes, so you get a nice little doming look to them, almost optically clear. So when you go through the dryer, you can see what's underneath them, whether you're working halftones or some type of imagery below them, so you can print a photographic piece of ice and actually have some texture to it. A lot of people have done that, and it's a great method and pretty easy to handle if you can figure out how to get a reasonably thick screen from 200 micron to 400 micron type of stencil. And with some of the thick coat emulsions, you don't even have to know how to hang a capillary film, which makes it a whole lot easier, and they're a whole lot more durable and aren't going to fall off as easy in the sink as a piece of film would. And then the other one that we buy by the drum is Fashion Soft, or a curable reducer, so that we can soften the prints. And you mentioned one we call stain, where we drop in maybe a 0.5% of black in basically the curable reducer. So when we print it on any color, the shade it looks like a wet shirt. It's a darker red on red, a darker orange on orange.
Tone on tone.
Yeah, your customer thinks you're changing ink color, so no charge for the ink changes. That's the promotion of the week. We do tons of work with Fashion Soft, and the fun thing to do, and I think I got this from my OP days. We used to do a lot of glitter and puff back in the late 80s. And we had children's wear license, OPC, Ocean Pacific Children's Wear. So the whole idea is everything we designed and built for children's wear had to be something that the kids could touch and feel and stick their hands on. And I think over time we've developed into our community wants to touch and feel. You can't go to the airport without picking up a shirt and seeing whether it's in register or not, or touching it and trying to figure out what they did here or there. And it goes both directions, ultra soft and then texture. I mean, we'll have people that'll argue with us and say, that's real applique. No, it's a screen print. No, that's got to be real applique. Get your key out and start digging into the ink and find out if it's real applique or not. So I think you can just start by getting a few. Don't get too many things going at once. You want to try, I think, ultimately pushing towards the ultra soft, because that's a sort of a theme. It's been going on for the last many years, the ultra soft, ultra smooth drape. And that comes from the brands, because that's what people are feeling and touching in the Kohl's or JCPenney's or whatever. So your clients are pushing for that. And then if you want to get into some textures, start working with a thicker emulsion, and they give you some coating techniques to create a certain stencil thickness. And try the clears. The clears are pretty forgiving because they melt in the dryer, so you're not going to be held accountable for a real sharp edge. And so those are the two that I would play with first, and they're by far our biggest sellers. And a lot of the clears have a inherent tack to them. So while they're hot, you can do weird shit with foil, and you can use them as foil adhesive.
Pull it off, and it'll reflect. Yep.
So we do a ton of that kind of stuff, and if you can make a specialty application simple enough that you can get, but has a big enough impact that you can get premium for it, and it doesn't cost you a bunch of production time or a bunch of bodies to do it. That's the magic in special effects. Michelle mentioned she worked for, you can figure it out, one of the big mills that has a manufacturer in Honduras. And she talks about how the specialty printing, there's more money in it because people will pay more for it, and you have to do enough of it so that you can get good at it and you can turn and burn on your specialty applications. But you can't do too much of it mixed in with your all your stuff where it can eat you alive, because you're constantly making nothing but 400 micron screens, and they take that much longer to dry, and the materials are that much more. So there's kind of a magic balance in offering those things, and then being able to show people what you can do. You know, Bob's Towing's not going to do an 18 color texture whatever, but if you can do that and it's hanging on the wall, he certainly is going to trust you with his 2-color logo. You know, I mean, there's some stuff, and a lot of what we do at trade shows is just so we can show what you can do, not what you maybe would do. Maybe not 3 effects, maybe just 1, maybe not 14 colors in the sim process, maybe only 7 or 8. I mean, there's, you know, we usually are just kind of pushing things to show what we can do, not necessarily what we should.
So one thing I want to kind of go back, and you just hit so many awesome things right there. So one, yeah, absolutely. Taking your curable reducer and just like a little tiny bit of black in there to that tone on tone look. That's like one of the great easy to go. That way you're not like trying to like hold the shirt and like mix the color like just off. Don't waste your time. Curable reducer, a little bit of black. You can even tint it a little bit of a color if you want to really hit that too. Also, you want to go on a white shirt or a light shirt without an underbase. You can make it feel like a water-based print. You can use that curable reducer in your inks, and you can print it so there's almost no hand whatsoever. But what I really want to go back to is what you talked about. You kind of quickly went over screen making, and you kind of mentioned using like a higher solids of a emulsion, so a thicker emulsion versus cap films. So for those who may not know, a capillary film is literally it's emulsion basically poured into like a big pan, and then it kind of just gels in that pan. They take that, they put it into a big like bag basically, and you can take that off and you can apply that to your screen. There's a little water and a squeeze, you apply it to the screen, and you can build up a capillary stencil, and it's a controlled stencil, right? So it's 200 micron, 300 micron, 400 micron. But they're painful to use. You get good at them. You get people that have been doing it for 20, 30 years, right? And they can make it look like it's nothing. I've seen some of the old timers at Murakami just literally just like, here you go. And you're like, how did you make that happen so quick? But for most of us, it's a lot more complex. So what would you recommend for people that are trying to get into maybe using the HD clear, or another easy one that I always say, like, hey, it's reasonably cheap to get from your supplier, worth trying? Puff. Right? Puff you can have some pretty simple fun with. It works even if you have a smaller IR dryer. You can still get a puff usually. You have to run through second time possibly, but what would you recommend for people that are just trying to get into it? Maybe they don't have the ability to actually measure out their stencil, right? They don't want to spend $2,000 on these little tools to find things. Would you recommend just kind of doing a couple coats, letting it dry, and then doing a face coat, or letting that dry again, or going capillary film? If they really want to kind of build that stencil up, what do you recommend?
And these are experiences again. I was doing a consulting gig a year or two ago, and they wanted to get into some specialty applications, and we've been capillary film users since we were challenged by Nike. Now their specs are, they would use terms like so many mil thick high density. So in order to get that, we had to figure out how many, do we use a 200 micron, 400 micron? You can buy cap film from 10 microns all the way up to 1,000 microns and probably more. It doesn't really apply to our industry. And we played with methods to create better ways to get the cap film to stick. We use emulsion instead of water. And ideally, we get an absolutely perfect RZ flatness, and we know what thickness it is every single time. Whether, we call it low density, high density, mid density, whatever, we choose our films that way. But while I was at this place, I'm thinking these guys are not sophisticated enough to do this. There's no way I can teach them to hang cap film, especially 400. 30 microns is pretty easy to do with water, and everything works fine. And you get a few methods dialed in, and you can coat pretty consistently with cap film on the thinner stuff. The thick stuff is harder to get to hang on, number one, and number two, if you don't get it fully exposed, which is really hard to do sometimes depending on the light source, you could be rinsing, and then in the middle of the A falls off 10 minutes into it because it's not fully exposed, or it's just too small and you can't hold it, So we opted. I called. We grew up on Yolano Kiwo, so I called my good friend Richard, and I said, "What are regular people doing?" And he said, "Let me send you this thick coat." And they've got kind of a chart: go 2 and 2 to get 100 microns, 2 and 4 to get 200 microns, 2 and 6 to. And I'm like, I know it won't be perfect, but let's run this. Nailed it. And you can do a coating chart that way by just go your 2 on the substrate side, and then on your squeegee side go 1, and then bring it up and go 2, and then 3, and then 4, and you get 3, 4, 5, 6 different stencil thicknesses to determine what it is you want to create, the height of your ink. So the thickness of the mesh plus the thickness of the stencil is related directly to the thickness of the ink deposit. So a thicker stencil gives you a thicker ink deposit. All that being said, you don't need a 400 micron stencil to make a puff print. You can just, instead of, if you're using an SPQ, which are pretty popular photopolymers right now, you just add another coat or two to the squeegee side, and you'll get you'll go from, say, on a 110 or a 125, you might go from a 30 micron stencil to a 60 micron stencil. And with the blowing action of puff ink, you're going to get a pretty darn thick blow by the time it goes through the dryer. So if you want anything past puff, then you need to do a little bit more, and drying becomes a little bit of a challenge. In Colorado, it's pretty easy for us because we're literally right now 10% humidity, so I can get screens pretty dry. But honestly, we have to humidify our storage area because our screens will get too brittle, our stencils will get too brittle. So we're kind of opposite of, say, Alabama or something, where they can't get their screens dry. But ultimately, that piece of it, because once you have all that wet emulsion on there, it takes a little babysitting. And that's simply keeping an eye on it, making sure it doesn't drip. And we always say, don't use fans unless you're trying to force dry it. Something like this. The key is getting the skin on the bottom so that it won't drip. So once you get the skin, you're in good shape. You can turn the fan off and everything will be fine. But sometimes we have to flip the screen for a minute and then flip it back so that we keep it from. And that's when you're getting a little bit extreme. When you're trying to get 300 and 400 micron stencils, that's a lot of liquid. But you can easily do 100 and 200 micron stencils, do some great clear type of work. Some of these high density inks like soft base, soft density, they're a little more forgiving. They blow like a puff, but they more kind of blow up. So you can use a 100 micron or 200 micron stencil and actually get a little bit higher blow out of it and not have to. And the other thing that isn't so hard, especially on the manuals, you can flash print a 200 micron or 100 micron stencil easier than you can figure out how to print a 400 micron stencil as far as getting it all to break loose and all that. So again, going back to water-based techniques for your Plastisol printing, all rules apply across the board.
Love it.
Did I cover it?
Yeah, no, you did.
I forgot the question. What?
No.
I'm wondering really quick, if anybody in the audience has any questions, just type them in the chat. Lon and Matt are here to answer. So if there's anyone sitting here wondering, even something really specific to your shop, we'd love to talk about it and get into the nitty gritty details. But sorry to cut you off there, Matt. Go ahead. What was your question?
No, I was going to bring up. So a lot of this is why I love screen printing. So I'm not a great artist, right? I pretend to be. I can make some okay art, but it's going to take about 40 times longer than somebody has that natural gift. Right. So like, look what I made. It took me a week. Look what I did in 2 minutes. You're like, all right, I quit. Right. So what I love about screen printing is you can find new ways to be artistic. So I spent years running a large print shop. That's really where I became aware of Lon. Kind of going to the shows, learning from him, learning from different guys that are out there, Charlie Tobliebs, all those guys. Right. And I'm starting to kind of like remove myself from like what I thought was the standard norm. done all sorts of crazy things and fun things and kind of figured it out. So when it comes to special effects too, like Lon was saying, play with things, right? It's all a matter of imagination. I did a really, really fun one when I used to run a shop that we would take a liquid gel and a liquid metal, right? So they were like a thicker, kind of a high density silver. But I wouldn't use a squeegee on the automatic press. I would actually take the squeegee out, and I got in thick boar bristle brushes, notched them out, put it in my auto. And so now what happened, I was running through like an 80 mesh, right? It had to be a bigger open area, but I'd have this great ripped metal look, all from using a bristle brush to force that ink through. So you can play with all sorts of different ideas and techniques. The one that Lon mentioned a little bit ago too, about using the high density clear, the HD clear, and then just while that's super tacky, put like stamp some foil by hand, have someone kind of just like stamp it there, and it kind of gives us a nice, cool, peeled look. So the fun thing about getting a special effect is like there's the easy ability to say, hey, I can offer this, I can do an upcharge for this, and you can easily add. And I've seen people do anywhere from like 30 cents more for a puff to like $2 more for a puff per shirt, and it's really not that hard to deal with puff inks. But you can start kind of getting your own unique niche of a special effect that you find you're able to do pretty effectively, efficiently, and not bog you down. And maybe you can even come up with one that is really unique that no one around you is even offering, because maybe they haven't thought of it like that yet. So a lot of it comes down to use your imagination. What would look awesome? What can you do to upsell your customer, really give them the wow experience too? Because a lot of this comes down to doing special effects. It's not really because you necessarily want to be a print nerd like I was and be like, what can I make happen just for fun, right? You might want to figure out, what will the customer come back for? What can I make customers' apparel stand out from the rest of them? So figure out what you're good at, but don't be afraid to play as well and figure out new techniques. It's impossible to say, oh, it's all been done before. It hasn't all been done before. People haven't always maybe done a mixture of techniques together to make all sorts of stuff. So don't feel like you can't play around, even if you are on a manual press. You can do all sorts of fun stuff with different additives in your inks and make something new.
You know, like one brand new technique that it doesn't matter who we show, that never goes away. If some Bob's towing, I'll go back to. Hey, what can you do to my logo? Well, here's a new technique. We'll distress it. We'll make it look vintage. I mean, the whole damn world has gone vintage. Yeah. And that's a fad that started 30 some years ago with Abercrombie and Fitch. So distressing's not going away, and that's an easy thing to apply. It's not necessarily something you do on press, though you can add to the look with real soft hands or almost real feeling painted chips with some of the crack bases and things like that. Mostly just, distress patterns are like type fonts now. You need to have about 4 million of them in your Photoshop docs so you can reach out for a wood texture, you can reach out for a stone texture, reach out for multiple textures over the top to give something a little bit different look. So that's more, art driven, of course, but you can do some things on press too with variation to get some nice touch and feel types of looks. But you'd be surprised how many of your wholesale customers don't really understand that what they're looking at Kohl's, they could apply to their logo. And a lot of times it's as simple as taking Bob's Towing and putting a pattern over the top of it, and they fall in love with it. Everybody wants something that's been, even with all the tri-blends and all these washes and garment dyes, and that whole thing is about buying a worn out shirt, and that's what they want. So I love distress. I mean, hardly any misprints. You're hardly pulling anything out.
Oh, you can get away with it. Lon, are you as much of a nerd as I am? Do you find yourself walking around all day, seeing different patterns, and like going up with your camera and like getting in there to get that beautiful texture, taking a picture of that, bringing it back, making it a bitmap in Photoshop, and then adding it to your library? I see like an old weathered sign that's been hit by the sun for 30 years, and all that paint kind of like lifts up, and you got that raw metal underneath there. It's like, that's a gorgeous little like 3x3 area, right? Yep. And I go and I take that photo and I'll drop it into a piece of art, and it'll be on a customer's shirt, and they won't even know. And that means more to me now too, because I brought a real world, my world, into that print.
Right, sure.
Super nerdy, but everybody should do that at all times. Like when you're walking past an old building, it's got a sweet brick texture, or like you walk through the ground, there's like this great crackle on the pavement. Like there's your texture. You don't necessarily need to go buy those texture packs that everyone's hucking on Instagram. You can, or you can also bring some of your world into your art, and it really is your art when you're trying to do that. But distress, like you said too, you can get away with all sorts of misprints with distress. Like, oh, it's a super distressed one. And they're like, oh, okay, right? And it's like, ooh, all right, let that one go through. But yeah, distress, fashion, soft base, all that. And then also maybe thinking about, like with this one, we coated the screen a lot thinner. I wanted the ability to say, look, if I want it to be more vibrant, maybe I'll do a print flash print. But I really want it to look like it's also been kind of washed and crackled up a little bit. So we went ahead and even thinned that down. So having a lot of that screen control, like we're talking about, and it all, like we said at the top of the hour, right, it all goes back to that screen. It all goes back to you control what you're trying to do based off what you make with that screen. So yeah, great points. Love it. All right. Actually, while we have a little bit of time left, can we, Nick, do you have some of the killer stuff that Lon's done over the years? I'm sure most people here have already looked you up, already know who you are. But for those who don't, and because we can't go to any of these trade shows for a while, hopefully mid 2021, I want to see if we can pull up some of the shirts that I've been in awe of Lon's work for a long time. And Lon, if you've seen these that we bring up and you want to bring up anything special about them, that'd be awesome.
Sure. You gotta love dragons. We've been doing dragons for stretch devices for the last probably 15 years. They used to put an automatic in their booth. Actually, 20 some years ago, they used to have. We called it Roller World. It was like a science fair with a couple automatics and manuals and graphics printing and a full operating screen department all inside their booth and the walls were made of giant roller frames. And we used to go in and spend like a day in there and watch what was going on with some of the great printers from those days, New Buffalo and Coudray and just some of the very best from that time, and then study the prints on the walls. And they would, they'd all have stories. It was on this tension with this tensile thickness. Before on low tension it ran at this many pieces an hour, and now on high tension we ran at this other. And my whole staff would spend at least a full day inside the booth studying their prints. So we got lucky enough years ago to be able to start printing for them in the booth in Roller World. And we've done several dragons, and this happened to be one of them. That he started out as a one color, and then we repurposed him for freehand graphics and made him I think he's just a 6 color, and then used the software to separate him to get those. And you can see the real high red and then the low red. That's just one red screen on a white printer, off a white printer, and then the transitions in between. So we're only using, like I said, I think it's only 6 colors, 2 whites. We got 4 screens in here and creating nearly a full color logo with the heavy shadow. And this is probably what we kind of call a traditional, fairly simple sim process print.
Love it. And yeah, gotta love dragons. Gotta love dragons.
We did this piece last year for Long Beach. Boy, wouldn't it be nice to be going to Long Beach. Obviously was for Wilflex, and the subject matter was again surfing, and we quickly slipped into Tiki World and created another kind of sim process type of approach. We also repurposed this for freehand graphics. They called it a Summer of Winters promotion, where they would bundle packages of film or the software with an hour of my virtual consulting. So we repurposed it. And as I explain how we did all of this, I kind of run back and say, in hindsight, I wish we had more negative space, because the whole idea of great sim process on black is lots of black. And we pretty much, like a good artist is known to do, used up every square inch of the print area and filled it with ink. So not compositionally, it's a lot of fun, but we probably should have had more of the black show through on it.
Got it. So again, learning from kind of doing, right? It's a stellar print, but you still learn something from that print.
Yeah, absolutely. And we took the face off of that and lifted it, and then created. This is a multi-textural effect. So the kind of the wood, and you can't really see it, but we used like an under everything. We used a black soft density, flashed it, and then set our regular print order on top of that. And then, so the big shapes are that black high density under everything. And then there's really small shapes for all the little dinky bumps that are on an HD clear that we put over the top of everything. So you have this kind of pyramiding effect where you're feeling kind of the big shapes, and then you're feeling like lots of little textures within it. So kind of adding multiple layers to give this kind of a lot of different tactile, interesting feel to it.
So you, just to get that clear, so you actually made a texture underneath and then printed your colors on top of that texture, which would allow for some movement in that. It would build up in some areas, it'd be lighter in some areas, and it would actually cause a different effect in itself.
Absolutely, because so what would happen is your ink color would fall off the edge because you're not going to hit that dead perfect. So like it created its own highlight and shadow on top of the intended highlight and shadow. So we've kind of learned this. We used to put white under so we could get the highest contrast out of our colors, but instead we've started doing the black under so that when you look at it sort of from the side, you start to pick up kind of a shadow on the side of the shape. So it's kind of a happy accident, I suppose, and that seems to work a little better for us to get those.
You Bob Ross, that you are now officially the Bob Ross of the industry. I think that was amazing. You just Bob Rossed us, and I love you for it. Awesome. That's killer. Ooh, yeah, I love this one. This one was, I think, 2 years ago, right?
Yeah, and this is kind of the contrast of texture, which made it really work. All the textures in the pumpkin head, and a similar approach. Rather than using the black high density, we used a black puff so that we could get the rounded shapes instead of the edges. And the overall compositionally, look at all the black that's in it. That's why this works so much or so well. We use kind of the old school big dot because it's so illustrative and graphic. I think we used like a 32 line halftone on this. To really give it that kind of creepy in a playful way feel, but because the setting is at night, you really can embrace your black of the shirt, and like those purples in the background. There's very little white underbase back there at all. There's just a little bit here and there to get to a little variation out of it, but again, that contrast of texture. The pumpkin head itself, it's not one big shape, so you feel all these kind of bumps and stuff in it, so it's not big heavy plastic. And then the background and the stuff he's wearing, super soft, super smooth, super soft. So you're not wearing that big plastic nasty print again.
But you're also bringing dimension to it, right? So where it's raising up, you're bringing it forward just by controlling the texture at the most front point, which is where he's leaning forward. So you're really bringing three-dimensional work with it. One thing that you talk about right there, that's a huge fun thing to play with is your output, right? Your LPI, your DPI, whatever it is, right? Adjusting that. People will always say, oh, I set it and forget it. Don't set it and forget it. Use that, right? I've also done prints where I might only output one film at like 32 and then output other ones back at 45. Sure. And I'll really force those dots to really play with them and change them. Like you said, that works perfectly with that print, gives it that very fun, illustrative, creepy comic look because you made it a slightly larger dot than you would have traditionally gone out of your rip. How often do you do that? How often do you adjust your dots for?
We do it every time. We choose it. We don't default. Now, I say that like that's some kind of arrogant approach to it. I suppose we have defaults where it doesn't matter to us. But in our rip, we have everything from 10 DPI all the way to 85. And in certain applications, photographic images with real small detailed areas, reflections in chrome or things like that, we'll use as high as an 85 LPI on 380s to get the real fine detail. These illustrative cartoony types of approaches will use a 32, maybe a 45, and those are somewhat arbitrary, but we've used as low as a 10 LPI. Now, this is kind of I'll deny this, even though it's probably being recorded, but I had one of my artists I was knocking off, that's a common term, a flag design from a fairly substantial brand. So there's plenty of risk when you do that. You shouldn't do that. I'm not saying you should do that. But I said, I want you to make this flag exactly like this. Because my plan was, and he didn't get it, he tried, changing it, because we have nothing but pure intentions here. So he finally got me what I wanted, and we outputted at 10 LPI, which is, a dot the size of the end of your finger. So when we outputted it, it became nothing like the original. It created this really cool, crazy texture within the art. And if you can't resolve a 10 LPI halftone, you got real problems. So in a lot of ways, if you don't need high resolution, why put yourself through that? Because at the end of the day, sometimes this is where the traditional sim process back in the New Buffalo, Dave Gardner days, it wasn't about 85 LPI. It was about 45, and it was about stand across the room and look at that impact that Maryland has. Look at that impact that football helmet has from 6 feet away, not getting up on top of it, looking, and in the grand scheme of things, these make better t-shirt art than a reproduction of a perfect photograph. You and I can geek out over it and look at all the detail and get the loop out and look at this dot on dot registration. You can see this going on, and the naked eye can't even pick that up. Yeah. But it's not, this again comes down to, it's more complicated, but it's stuff that we can handle, and we're not wrestling a high LPI on this while we're trying to build basically a kind of an illustration. It's not a photograph. So you really can use the not only the LPI, but the shape. You can do some weird stuff with shapes, round, diamond, line, and really create some cool textures that don't change much on press, but create some visual textures.
Yeah, love it. That's awesome. It's a great one.
I also just want to point out Batman is in this image. I know that there's people sitting here the whole time saying, "Is that Batman?" And yes, it is. That is Batman.
I'm not even lying. I was so busy looking at the dots, I didn't even notice Batman. That just made that shirt that much cooler.
We geek out a little bit here. You see some of our stuff we write about, Star Wars and Batman, and
I love it. I love it. I didn't notice that until now. Oh, this one blew my mind. I remember sitting. I won't call them out. I remember sitting in arguably one of the top 10 production houses in the Midwest, and we were looking at this, and they spent probably 2 weeks trying to get their direct to screen to figure out how to get the dots you guys pulled off on this print. This print is as gorgeous in person as it looks. It is so soft. This is one of the ones we talked about. People would probably argue that you had done some discharging on this. It is a gorgeous, very, very vibrant, smart print. A lot of the shirt color used, but it doesn't feel dark anywhere. It seems like it's fully bright, and it's probably 40% shirt color.
It was a fun one. We spent so much time on this. Corey's the illustrator on it, and we can sit together for hours and say, okay, here's the story. And this was directed by SGIA or Printing United Alliance or whatever they are now. They wanted kind of the old school, transitioning to Dallas, new name for the show, blah, blah, blah. Route 66 connects the two cities. I mean, there was a list of requests, and this is sort of what we came up with, old school Cadillac with this is from the Johnny Cash song. It's a 59, 57, 61, 62. It's got features from a bunch of late 50s and early 60s Cadillacs. and they're emphasized tremendously. But ultimately, when you brought up the output, and this is the advice I have for everybody running CTS, slow it down. That's how you get it. You slow everything down. These things are all sold. I got nothing ill will to say about the people that manufacture ours. I love it. I've been bleeding blue for 30 years. But you got to, if you want to do 85 LPI and you want smooth transitions, you're going to have to slow it down. You're going to have to run it unidirectional. You're going to have to, it all comes down to slowing it down, and you got to have a really, really good emulsion that can hold the resolution that you're trying to get. If you put a cheap emulsion together and you lose the bottom end 10% on down, you're not going to get the transitions, or the top end falls out. It's not one thing. It's all those things. It's process. That's why we call it process, right?
Yeah, love it. Thanks. Yeah, thanks for sharing that one. Oh yeah. See, now we're getting the ones I've seen for years, man. I've seen this. I can't even remember how many different.
It's been a while. That's at least 10 years old, maybe longer, 12, 14 years old. And that was a show shirt on a smaller press. Obviously, the New Orleans theme was the go-to here. And we had developed this character a few years ago at a trade show. We call him Vinny. Now this is Vinny with his boys playing in New Orleans, but we were able to get a lot of these tones based on, again, you can see it on and off the white printer. So we have a lot of violet and then purple, and we have a lot of forest and then green. We have that hot blue that's on and off the white base, creating multiple dimensions. And again, the New Orleans or the nighttime scenes are not easier. They lend themselves to this classic sim process approach. Heavy shadow, bright highlights, but they're thin. You see our one area of bright white is the skeleton and then the keyboard, but we broke that white up with the lines between the keyboards. So you're engineering it not to hold yourself so accountable to try to get a super bright white for big bright white areas. Don't do that to yourself. If you need bright white areas, break them, make them so they're it's one big white area, but we've broken it up so that we're not trying to get that solid white area, and it helps with the hand. So that where that folds in those keys, that's negative space. We don't usually print a black on black shirts, and that helps with the overall hand and drape again on your final print.
So with these, you don't find yourself having to really do much of a top black to kind of help with any trapping or any I like to call halftone fixes. You try to avoid that, or do you do a thin sheared black to kind of help some of that stuff?
We almost never do. And there's two reasons. One, if you nail everything, you shouldn't need it. Now that's asking a lot. And I'm not, again, trying to be some egomaniac. We mostly do it because we don't want to use the head on press. We want to use it for another color. We've already got black. So we do plenty of compensation. Don't get me wrong. We do chokes and gutters and all kinds of things to the underbases. We'll use soft and hard whites, we call them, where we stack whites so we get bright white areas and softer white areas on the front side. But we rarely will print black on black so that we can do some of those other tricks. This is not a great example, but we might choose to use up to 4 whites. So if you think about it, we would use our stacking method on the front end, where you would do a soft white for the medium tone colors and the transitions to zero or black, and then you'd use what we call a harder white. Maybe that one's on a 230, 305. The harder white's on a 180, 195. You stack them wet on wet, so now you got bright white areas in the white that you need. Run all your colors wet on wet, and then we might run what we'd call a blending white at the end, where if you've got pastel colors, and you're trying to transition from, pastel pink to a lavender or something, and you're trying to, just like you would be painting with a transparent white. So we use a kind of a 50-50 with halftone extender, so that it's a transparent white to give us our transitioning pastel tones, and then come over the top of it with a hard white. So the bright white areas, the real bursts of light, we've got that traditional underbase highlight white in those areas. So, I mean, it would be a very complicated image to use all of those, but we use a combination of some of that depending on the image.
That makes so much sense, though. I've always kind of been more thinking, like, especially with that one when we were looking at the Route 66, like, did you guys have like 3 whites in that Route 66? Do you remember? Yep. Okay. So I remember always thinking, I'm like, there's no way they're pulling this off in 2. So that makes more sense. But for some reason,
that's
we wouldn't do a 3rd white, but that's how you do that, because I've always had such a hard time getting that level of detail when it comes to those blends. The blends in this one, like I said, the picture, and I know Steve's in the chat nerding out about it too. In person, this thing is like it's another level. It's so soft with all those gradients and blends from the brightest purple down to nothing. It just beautifully done. Now I get it. You just blew my mind a little bit, Lon.
Well, it goes back to using a water-based trick, because that's what they do to build because the inks on top in water-based are so transparent that in order to get a maroon, they have to base it. Where we might, in Plastisol, just print the maroon directly on the shirt, or a red that's going to turn darker. Where with water, they've got to build a grayscale underneath it, because you don't want too much brightness underneath the maroon, or it'll turn pink. So we use some of those methods even here, because they still apply, and they really help us with the transitions. If you look at the tail fins on the Cadillac, they're reflections of both of the sides of the street. And we had to go as high as 85 LPI on this, just so you could make out some of the type and things in there. And it's a cartoon, so it didn't really need to be. It could just have been a blurry that you could tell was a reflection. But it was these things challenge us too. It's all part of just what, it's part of the fun of what we do, and we can apply that to paying customers when we will rarely use all 4 of those whites, but here's an instance where we did use 3: the soft and hard under, and then the highlight white to really get the Vegas sign and some of the real bright whites to pop.
I love it. All right, before we go down another nerd rabbit hole, we'll save some of this for the next time. I'm going to force you to be on with us. But that was awesome. Before we wrap up, though, is there anybody that has any questions? I know everyone's kind of probably sitting back, eating some lunch, and listening to the guru Lon speak, which it's been very informative. Literally, I just learned something myself. So, any questions, folks? While you, I don't think Lon's going to invoice you afterwards. So now you've got one of the best consultants in the world ready to answer any questions. So, are there any questions before we wrap things up, folks? Nothing yet. All right. Love it. All right. Well, Lon, on behalf of everybody that I'm sure also had their minds blown with looking at some of the detail and understanding why you made the intentional choices you made with the not only the separations, but how you work with the screens and the sequencing. Thank you for being a part of Printavo University and helping share the insight and knowledge that you bring to the table. It's been, like I said, you just taught me something. So I'm gonna probably go and start add more underbases and drive my partner in Sound and Fury crazy, adding extra underbases just to see what we can pull off. But thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it. Anything you want to shout out? Obviously, everybody, Graphic Elephants. Definitely check them out on Instagram. You guys have Facebook, website. Anything else you want to shout out to, Lon, before we go?
No, I just think during all of this craziness, these types of things are important. So I appreciate you guys and Printavo doing this. Community's kind of as good as it's been over the years. We're kind of learning how solid we are even through this. So we're one day closer to the other side of all this bullshit, and eventually we'll share a adult beverage again one day.
I cannot wait. I think the next time one of the actual big shows can happen, oh God, it's gonna be rocky. It's the ruckus that's gonna come out of that place. But yeah, I can't wait. First drinks on me, and for Lon, not everybody else watching. For Lon, broke. But again, Lon, thank you so much. Nick, as always, great chat with you guys. So on behalf of Printavo, thanks so much, folks. I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, Lon. Thank you, Matt. We will see you back in 2 weeks. We're going to talk about something a little different. I think we're going to talk about marketing. So same channel, same time. See y'all soon. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.